Okay, listed automatic transmission test 1. An electronically controlled automatic transmission uses a complex hydraulic system to regulate shift timing. That's actually, I don't really like that question because the electronics are going to regulate shift timing, but it's also got spool valves and springs and all of that. So it's fairly complicated hydraulically, but the other thing is that it's using a speed sensor instead of a hydraulic governor. So anyway, put false if you want to get that right, but I've never liked that question. A continuously variable transmission allows the engine to stay within its power band.
True.
True. That's why is that important? The engine's more efficient when it's in its power band. Why do we have 6-speed transmissions now? To keep it within its power band.
So
You got
180 miles an hour.
Yeah, well, whatever. All right, but anyway, you're basically wanting to stay in the power band. Transverse mountings are used primarily on rear-wheel drive vehicles, but in which the engine is mounted side to side.
False.
Sure.
That's actually false, yeah.
Backgammon.
Rear-wheel drive vehicles, please. Have you ever seen a transverse engine in a rear-wheel drive vehicle? What would be the point, okay? In longitudinal mounting, the transmission and transaxle are mounted front to back.
That's true.
That's true. What kind of mounting does your Cadillac have?
Longitude.
Longitudinal mounting. There's no drive shaft, right?
He guessed that.
And also, there's no transmission tunnel. It's just a flat floor. You can see it's made like an old Tucker automobile where that had an air-cooled engine in the back. All right. So what did you find out? Are you getting something? Huh? Oh, you had to get your board there. Okay. Although the composition of automatic transmission fluid has changed over the years, most automatic transmission fluids can be used in all vehicles.
No.
That's false. You can't just pour any automatic transmission fluid in there. You're not supposed to, because some of them. I mean, have anybody ever drove a vehicle that whenever you're driving along, you know these little strips of asphalt that they put over there to wake you up when you're coming to a stop sign? Yeah, have you felt the transmission do that when you're not running over those? Sometimes you'll feel that, like on some of the Crown Vickies and stuff, and that's torque converter chatter. You felt it? Does your Explorer do it?
My grandpa's 1978 Corvette does it.
Yeah. Well, basically, when you feel that, if it's because you got the torque converter's lockup nowadays is not just a straight lockup every time it kicks in. It's a modulated slip. It'll be like you look at your scan tool, it'll say torque converter lockup 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. So yeah, it doesn't want it to be completely locked up until it gets ready for that. And as it's doing that, because it's not completely locked up, what's it doing? It's slipping a little bit, and it's supposed to. But if it's got the friction modifiers, the similar formulation of this stinking stuff that I passed around for y'all to smell the other day, it's actually got some of that in the transmission fluid. And what it does is it actually lets it slip. Now that's actually formulated for positive traction differentials. It's got a limited slip. Okay, they've got some clutches in there and that big S spring in them that pushes on those clutches so that when you're turning, you can still have one wheel turning faster than the other one. But whenever when those clutches need to be able to slip, but whenever the wheels are pulling and you're spinning, both of the wheels will pull instead of one of them spinning and getting you stuck. You got me? But anyway, that's what that friction modifier was for. If it's not in there, if somebody changes the fluid in one that's got limited slip and you're going around a curve, you'll feel it going, and that limited slip makes it do that. Well, the torque converter clutch does the same thing. Torque converter clutch can also make one surge like it would if EGR wasn't working right. See what I mean? So just be particular about that. And I've actually driven one that somebody, they gave me a car one time, they said, this thing's actually got a peculiar feel to it. And this was in 1989 when Eagle Summits were brand new, and we were actually the one that were selling, Jeep Eagle. And this thing, you could see that, initially they said they could see the tack going up and down. All right, so this is a weird story, so hang with me. Okay, the tack's wiggling up and down. And so then they said they could feel it surging. Okay, so I cleaned the injectors, and it cleared up. And then they said it was okay for a couple of days, and it started doing it again. And so I worried with that thing for a while. And then we got a hold of this guy named Dave Farley from New Orleans, from Chrysler, because we were talking about it with the Chrysler engineers. And this car was a brand new platform that had just come out. And he says, I want you to take the transmission fluid, drain it out of there, and put ATF4 or whatever it was. It was a +4, and that had a friction modifier in it. I didn't know it at the time. Well, me and the shop foreman, when we heard him say that, he laughed, but it took care of that problem. I mean, and that was the same deal. It felt like a surge. Well, a while later, I get one that's got a surge, and they're giving it to me because it's a doggone. That's Jim Crudup. It's giving it to me because it's a thinks a drivability problem, and I could tell it was the same deal, and so I changed the fluid, and it took care of that one. Hello, Jim. Tomorrow morning's fine, Jim. I appreciate it. All right, alrighty. That was our oil change guy that was supposed to come in. All right, so here we got transmission. Who orders transmission parts needs to know the model year of the car.
Needs to know
Well-
what transmission's in it.
Yeah, that's right. He needs to know the model year of the car first. He needs to know what transmission's in it. Have you ever found yourself as a parts guy asking questions they didn't know how to answer,
Oh, all the
that
time.
you didn't know how to answer either? Like, for instance, well, I would go into the doggone parts room in the Ford place, and I would say, I need such and such a fuel pump or whatever for a Taurus. And they say, is it a 16-gallon tank or an 18-gallon tank? I said, heck, I don't know. Am I supposed to drain that thing out and pour gas in it to see what it'll hold? Don't give me a hard time, man. I just want to fuel send it in. And then I found out you could lay under the car and look at the numbers on the tank. If it was an A, it was 16 gallon. If it was a B, it was 18 gallon. And then I further thought about that. And I said, the station wagons all have got 18 gallon tanks. But they didn't tell me that in the parts room. All they asked was it was 16 or 18 gallon tank.
Wow.
See what I mean? But the number on the transmission helps too. If you got the little number on the sticker on the transmission, that helps. And you can also get sometimes you can get information off the decal on the door. Okay, petroleum-based automatic transmission fluids offer better durability under higher temperatures and better lubrication qualities than synthetic, and that's false. Viscosity additives keep the ATF from becoming too thick at low temperatures and too thin at high temperatures.
True.
Automatic transmission fluid is usually dyed red. Why do we do that? Why do we dye red?
That way you can identify a leak.
There you go. You got it on the ground. Say that's red. So transmission fluid. Unless somebody's using power steering fluid. I mean, automatic transmission fluid or power steering.
Yep.
And sometimes people do. Common foot powder or a black light can be used to define the source of an ATF leak.
True.
Sometimes you'll see a transmission and you would swear. Listen to this, Melissa. You'd swear it was leaking from the transmission oil pan, and you might even service the transmission, trying to fix that, putting a new gasket in the filter and all that, and it leaks the same way. And you find out that the O-ring around the dipstick tube is doing that. And it'll come off of there and it'll run right down there. So if you ever run into that, where you just swear it's leaking, particularly on the right side over there, clean that off and make sure it ain't coming from the dipstick tube O-ring. That way you save yourself a lot of trouble. You know, of course, Siggy'd probably like to sell a transmission service anyway, you know what I'm saying? Huh? Yep, if it's coming from above. Which of the following, oh, by the way, that Dodge truck has got oil coming from up under the cylinder head gasket. That Dodge truck that belongs to the college. And it's what's funny, what I told him, I said, the head's got to come off that thing to fix that. And he says, okay. And I said, you may as well put timing chains on it while you're pulling the heads off. Okay, well, the timing chains are $400, and that's our price, you know, with all the stuff that comes with them. So, well, is this dangerous? When we start a fire, and it's dripped enough oil to where it's deteriorated that A-frame bushing. So, I mean, it needs fixing, but somebody's got to pull the heads off of it. Or one of them, the head is leaking. You know, that oil leak on the passenger side back in the back, it's coming from under the head.
May as well give it to me since I'm doing so many timing jobs.
Yeah, timing chain jobs are really good for our girl over there. Okay. Which of the following is not a main function of an automatic transmission? Hello?
Huh?
Does it provide for manual upshifts and downshifts?
Some of them do.
Yeah, by and large, just, you know, whatever. And if you have a Jeep, for example, though, listen to this. Let's say it won't shift by itself, but you can shift it manually. Look for a blown fuse. And there was a girl out here, blown fuse, because the transmission computer is not powered up. You can shift it manually, but it won't shift automatically. So the transmission control on them older Jeeps, it was right in front of the passenger. Pull that wire harness down. There's an inline fuse there. You
How
know.
about that?
Yeah, but it's in the fuse panel on some of the other ones. But this girl that was in here one time, Alicia, she says, my car won't shift. She called me, and I said, check the fuses. And it was a little car almost just like yours. It was a Grand Am. And she says, when I told my daddy that, he said, you were an idiot. And then I checked the fuses, and I found one blown, and now it shifts great. Well, he couldn't figure out why a fuse would be blown. He thought I was just talking out of my hat. But you know, the cheap and easy thing's what you do first, always. Always you do it cheap and easy. Don't go and do the hard, expensive stuff first and find out then it had a blown fuse. That's ridiculous. You got me? But people do that all the time.
That was our Ford dealership.
Determines the, okay, what determines the power band?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Hey, you guys are really smart. Engine, camshaft profile, air and fuel delivery, and cylinder head design. What kind of transmission controls shift point timing through signals from a computer? Is it?
Electronically controlled.
So, are you sure? You're sure that's right about that? Electronically control sound right to me. Which of the following is not a method of correctly identifying the transaxle transmission?
Mounting configuration.
Date coding.
Date code, yeah.
What about mounting configuration?
So I had about the
Show
You
off.
could have several different transaxles in one that's transversely mounted, right? Parts man should know that. Okay, the seal ring that requires special installation tools is what kind of ring?
Walking steel.
Huh?
Solid. It's a solid Teflon ring. And basically, like on some of these old GM transmissions, you used to have to work that thing in there, and then it put a resizer over it to hold it in place where it would squeeze back in where it should be. It's aggravating. And that's all the questions you got, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. Now let's jump on to number 2.
2.
Let's jump in automatic transmission test 2. Okay, the sprag clutch and roller clutch are 2 types of planetary gear sets used in automatic transmissions.
Why not?
Huh?
Yeah.
They're not planetary gear sets.
That's what I said.
Look, she's already had to change her answer, right?
Huh?
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
I was making
That pen went down so fast. Okay, it's the combination of rotary flow and vortex flow that actually makes the torque converter function.
True.
We have a stator one-way clutch problem is suspected a stall test or a bench test can be run.
False.
You guys don't remember what I told you last week?
What?
What's a stall test for?
It's to check the stator one-way clutch.
That's right, it is, because if you got stall speeds low, if your engine's not underpowered, but what else? What about a bench test?
I don't know about bench test.
Yeah.
That's pulling it out, isn't it?
You'd have to have some, you gotta have the converter out on the bench. You can't
Yeah.
test it on the bench if it's in the car, okay? That's just like a starter. You got a bench as a start, you're gonna put a starter. So what you gonna do, the stator support is part of what other part? The stator support,
It's a part of the front pump.
bingo! Okay, so if you've got a front pump that will fit that, well, y'all were making eyes at one another across the room. What's up with that? Leave it, yeah, simplify. Okay, all right. Now we're gonna take this and we're gonna poke this stator support down in there and let it engage in there. And you can tell if that one-way clutch is bad or not like that. See that?
Okay.
All right, because basically it actually goes into the inside part of that one-way clutch. Remember I told you that never turns, but the stator inside of the stator goes on it. Okay, let's see. The Simpson gear set is the most common type of planetary gear set. I don't know how they can say that nowadays because there's so many different kind of transmissions out there. But if you want to get that right, put a T next to it. Lockup chuggle refers to a vibration that occurs during a plow or release of the lockup clutch or after the lockup occurs. That's actually false. I'm going to tell you something. The word chuggle is a word that I've never heard used, and I could be a total airhead here, but I've never seen that in anything except a GM publication. GM publications use the word chuggle. I've never seen anybody else say chuggle.
Have you ever heard that word in such a term?
Yes, I guess. Stator one-way clutch can fail only if the clutch is constantly locked.
False.
False, it can be spinning either way. Most planetary gear checks are simple visual inspections for damage and wear.
True.
True.
Also, on some transmissions, some people get so deep into automatic transmissions that they figure out what causes certain failures. Like for instance, on some of those Nissan RE401 transmissions, they'll say, the planetary gear set doesn't get enough oil for lubrication through this little hole in the separator plate that goes between the valve body and the transmission. And so, if you want your transmission planetary gear set to last longer, you need to drill this particular hole out from this size to 2 sizes bigger, and it will get more oil, and they'll lubricate better, and it won't fail. I mean, they really, really, really get deep into this. You know what I mean? And so, I never really have had the desire to get that deep into an automatic transmission. You know, I kind of like to build it back like it is. However, if it's going to keep you from having problems later, you'll actually see that in the rebuild kit. They'll actually show you a picture of the separator plate, and they'll do this. And we did one time. They had to clean the. Here's something else. Let me tell you this while I'm thinking about it, because it's really, really, really important. The oil that's leaving the transmission, going into the transmission oil cooler, where's it coming from? Where did it just come from? The torque converter. The torque converter is where the heat's being created in an automatic transmission, the lion's share of it. Okay, what if something goes wrong and it starts shearing some metal parts like the teeth off inside the torque converter? What leaves the torque converter along with the oil that's headed to the cooler? A bunch of metal filings go in there, right? And when it finally gets to where it's wiped out the torque converter, let's say that you pull it down, you find out, you look down in the torque converter, oh, these teeth are wiped out. So you go ahead and you put clutches and seals in the torque converter and all that kind of stuff and clean everything up. You put it back together, all of those metal filings that are in the daggum oil cooler are going to come right back into the transmission, into the sump, and get picked up. Some of them are small enough to go through the filter a lot of time. They're going to get in the valve body and it's going to stick.
Is that why you got the magnets?
Yeah, you can, the magnet's in there for, you know, just eventualities. There's going to be a lot of little tiny metal particles that are coming off, and you don't want them going anywhere except to that magnet. That's where you want them to stay, right? Of course, if they're aluminum parts, they're not going to go there.
Mm-hmm.
But the long and the short of it is, I don't know how Magneto on the X-Men can do stuff with aluminum and lead and all other kinds of metals, you know, that the people that don't know anything about magnetism believe that hogwash, you know, but you can't do magnetism with ferrous metal. All right, the long and the short of it is, what you're supposed to do if you see one that's got a lot of metal in the pan, if you don't want to have, if you may do everything right on that automatic transmission overhaul, everything perfect, but if you don't either replace that radiator and blow those lines out, or put an external cooler on it and bypass that contaminated cooler, you're going to be worrying about that thing for 3 weeks trying to clean the valve body over and over and over again to get all the particles out of it. And we ran into that one time here. But you better keep an eye on that. If there's a lot of metal in the pan, those lines needs to be blown out, and that cooler either needs to be replaced, the whole radiator needs to be replaced, which ain't a bad idea.
When it comes from the cooler, does it go to the pan?
Yeah, it goes right into the pan. Seems like the filters stop it, right? Too many times, there's little pieces that are small enough to get through the filter, but they're small enough to get through the filter, but they're big enough to foul those valves in the valve body, and you'll stick valves, and you'll drive down the road with it shifting great, and when you pull back in, it'll be hung in third gear and it won't downshift, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff. But always take that radiator, that cooler, and get rid of it, because you don't. I actually put one in there just for the heck of it, and let the parts washer go through it all night, through a paint strainer, and it pushed enough metal filings out of that stupid thing overnight to fill up a salt shaker. I mean, it was a lot of little metal filings and all that. So anyway, Ravino gear set operation, same for Simpson gear set, right?
Sure.
What do you think? Then why in the world do you need it?
Why is it 2 different names?
Yeah. Actually, that's true. The primary cooler for fluids in transmission is located beside the transmission.
Oh.
It's either in front of the transmission. Here's another little funny automatic transmission story, and it's tickled the crud out of me. I just, like around here, we don't have a ton of liability, so we just try stuff. As long as it's safe, there's nothing wrong with trying it, right? So this lady says, and she's the one that we did the brakes on, the red one the other day. Anyway, she's got this transmission. There's transmission's acting crazy, and the people down at the service station said there's water in the transmission because it looks milky looking fluid, And so I pull the dipstick, and sure enough, the fluid's looking milky, like there's got water in the transmission. I said, how did this happen? Well, maybe it needs a radiator, because it's the radiator. But no, this thing didn't go to the radiator. The cooler was external. I never could figure out, unless they went through a deep creek or something, and it went in through the vent. I don't know how water got in the transmission. But I said, tell you what we're going to do. I said, we're going to do a full transmission fluid exchange with our fancy machine out here. And then we're going to put a solenoid body on it, which is fairly easy to do on one of those Chrysler transmissions. It's right there on the outside. We got that done, put it on there, and then we're going to go ahead, after we've done the full fluid exchange and we've done that, we're going to pour some seafoam transmission tune in there. And after we get through with that, we're going to let you drive it and see what it does. Because it wasn't doing right before. I mean, it was cutting up and, chattering and bucking and jumping and all that. Well, after we did all that, she took off and drove it. And I wrote about it in a Motor Age article. And some guy that was a real super duper hotshot expert on those kind of transmissions sent me a scathing rebuke. If it even has as much as a teaspoon of water in it, that whole transmission needs to be pulled out and rebuilt. I mean, he was just really acting really ugly about it. And I said, well, it's like this. We did that job. You just read this article like yesterday, I guess, but we did this job 8 months ago, and she's been driving this thing like 300 or 400 miles a week ever since then. And she hasn't had any more trouble. So the moral of that story is the proof's in the pudding, buddy.
There you go.
You know what I mean? We didn't have to overhaul the transmission. We did what we felt like we could do just to see, if it didn't act. I told her, so we may have to rebuild it. But we're going to try this first. And she's still driving that thing. She drives it right now. And that was like 2 years ago. Never had any more trouble with it. That's how you can tell you did a good repair. And by somebody else is thinking, oh, this has to be done exactly the way I say every time, Come on. One size does not fit all. All right, let me see here. Well, let's see. Where did I lost my place? I can't.
Last one.
The most common type, not the last one. The most common type of in-vehicle test is the converter leak test. That is absolutely 100% false. The converter can leak from that button on the front of it. If it's dripping transmission fluid out of the bell housing, and you got a transmission leak out there, you're going to look for two things really, really, really close. It's not always the front pump seal. But when you get it out of there, the front pump seal needs to be replaced, and the bushing if it's worn out too, the one behind there. But you better be looking at that button on the front of that torque converter, and you better be checking the flywheel, because if the flywheel's cracked, enough, that actually,
Like the wobble.
it actually causes it to, the converter nose gets pressure on it because the flywheel's cracked. You got me? We've seen that here before. And if you better put air pressure on that torque converter, get you a thick rubber thing with a little hole in the middle of it, shove it down on there hard, put air pressure on the torque converter, have your buddy watch it, see if it's bubbling anywhere around that nose on the front of that converter. And it'll beat you up. Number 11, an impeller, a turbine, and a stator are components of what?
Torque converter.
A lockup clutch inside the torque converter that mechanically locks at the coupling point is
Torque converter clutch.
torque converter clutch. That's right. Which of the following are, why do we want the torque converter to go into lockup so that the engine and the drive shaft are turning the same speed, or the engine and the turbine shaft?
Slip.
Huh?
So there's no slip.
And that's beneficial because
More,
fuel economy, basically.
That's when the
You got
sixth
it?
gear comes into play.
Here's another thing about fuel economy. Did you know that you get, you're pushing a lot more, let's see, 1.5 times as much air is being pushed. You got the wind drag on the car at 65 as there is at 55. When you're going 65 instead of 55, you're pushing 1.5 times as much air. And here's something else. How many of you have driven from Daleville to Dothan? Like if you start at Daleville and you drive to Dothan, it's a pretty good ways, right? Seems like a long way. All right. I'm going to start, and I'm going to drive 55 miles an hour all the way to Dothan, and you're going to drive 65 miles an hour, and we take off from the same light at the same time. And it's what, 12, 15 miles? Pretty good way. Okay, you're going to pull up to that stoplight at the traffic circle, and you're going to be sitting there waiting for that light to turn when I pull up behind you. What did you gain? You didn't gain anything. I mean, you drove 65 miles an hour, and it was a heck of a lot of fun, but, and the speed limit is 65, but you burn more gas, and I pulled up behind you. See? And you didn't actually gain that much distance on me. That's the point. You're not going to get there that much quicker. That's the deal, if you're only going 12, 15 miles. Okay, now then, which of the following are the three members of a planetary gear set?
The sun gear, the planetary gear, and the ring gear.
Planetary gear set damage and noise can be caused by... He's not talking very loud. What? Excuse me? Within the torque converter?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Please. She didn't read the rest of the question.
Chipped gear teeth and lack of lubrication.
That is correct. Now finally, number 15, gear speed and torque output depend on what?
Both A and B.
The torque, the tooth count of the gears and the gear ratio. All right, those were not difficult tests. But, oh, by the way, can anybody tell me whose signature this is? That's yours? Excuse me, did you deliberately sign this so I couldn't read it or what? Look at that. Can anybody tell that says his name? We're talking squiggly line city, man. I don't understand. Okay, all right.